I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is really talking about the shift from outcome to intention and how that kind of shift of awareness can open up vast new possibilities for us. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, energizing all your cells, all your molecules, all your electrons, creating this brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And now, as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue, and let's just now press our palms gently together and very softly rub your fingers against your palms. The idea here is to ground yourself in the physical, to feel the deliciousness, presence yourself to the deliciousness of the sensations that are available to us in these remarkable physical forms that enable us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning. It's great to be here with you this morning, and I think this is a great conversation to have, because when we talk about outcomes or goals, it's pretty black and white, right? I mean, we either achieve the goal or we don't. We either get the outcome that we desired or we don't. I know that, let me think, what is it? There's a certain way to be setting goals. It needs to be measurable. It needs to be within your control. There are certain things that we use as metrics to set goals, and then we can focus on those goals and oftentimes manifest them, which is pretty cool in and of itself. However, when we're setting those goals, there are a lot of dynamics that go along with that. Like, we're only as good as our next accomplishment. We're only as good as the next goal. So, we may accomplish a goal and then we don't really feel the fulfillment around it, right? And if we don't make it, then we get to experience failure or whatever we do dynamically for ourselves. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. It's great to have you here with us this morning. We're talking about intention versus outcome, like specific outcomes, which we could also call goals. And I really have made a move away from goals and toward intentions. And the reason for that is that, first of all, we often set goals and we don't, the goal becomes the thing in and of itself. And so then we measure ourselves and our performance based on this externality, and often internalize that whole sense of worth, success or failure, that we're guiding ourselves by these external metrics. With outcomes, I think it goes deeper. I think what we get to look at is what our with intentions. With intentions, it goes deeper. We get to look at, if we're setting a goal, even, what's the intention? Why is that goal relevant? And then we can be focusing instead on the intention. The goal is feedback, but the goal is limited, whereas the intention has all kinds of ways that it may manifest that could go way beyond what we might have imagined. So if I'm trying to think of a specific example. You know, let's say I have a conversation that I am going to be having, and if I have an outcome of I want to get a contract for X amount of money, that's my goal. Whereas that's a very different energy even than if I have an intention of creating relationship and rapport and communication and possibility for an ongoing partnership or affiliation, right? It's very, very different tone that's going to be taken to that interaction, right? If I have an intention of creating a relationship and connection, it may be that I don't come out with the contract that I wanted, but who knows what other doors might open up to me. Maybe I get to be part of a network that is way more expansive than anything I had previously imagined. Good morning, Lisa. So good to have you here with us. So we're talking about intention versus outcomes or goals. And the thing about goals is that they are really black and white, and that's by very definition, like they're meant to be very specifically conscribed objectives. And when we have an intention, then anyway, to me, like the experience of intention is that it's much more open. It is much more expansive. There's room for a multitude of possibilities, and the pressure of trying to make it look a certain way is relieved, because we're kind of, with intention, we're kind of stepping into a flow versus it's like power versus force. You know, the goal thing is more like trying to strong arm things into the specific parameters and constraints that we define for ourselves. And I think intention allows us to get more present to a place of meaning. So Rosalind says, what metric is being used to measure an improvement? That's a really great question. Is the feeling the feedback? When there is discord versus ease of flow? I love that question. And I think that this is a massive transformation of paradigm that we have an opportunity to be engaging with. And that is, instead of the externalities, to be presencing ourselves more to our internal metrics. And the caveat here is that we're not talking about reactivity necessarily, although if we can notice our reactivity, that's a really good metric to be able to wake up to something that we need to pay attention to. But improvement is something that, again, is very relative. Like, how do we define improvement in the first place? And I think the way that we define improvement is going to very much influence the kinds of metrics that we use. So I think, to your point, Rosalind, is the feeling, the feedback. I think that we can educate our feelings so that they are well, regardless of how educated they are, our feelings are very powerful feedback. And we can know if something feels off. We can know if we feel good about something, we feel satisfied. Now, if our relationship to the self and the world is super skewed, and there's an argument to say it's always super skewed, like we can't escape that. But if we're really reactive, if we're caught in this loop of reaction, then the feedback that we're getting is something that we could look at to say, hey, what's going on with me that I'm so upset? And I've found myself doing that oftentimes. Now, it takes some self-awareness to say, oh my gosh, I'm going off the rails. What's up with this? Rather than just continuing to go off the rails. So there's always this part of ourselves that in order to be able to utilize the feedback, we need to be able to step back to some kind of dimension of observer self. But I think that the internal metrics are really important, like when we recognize an experience of ease and flow, as you said, discord versus ease of flow. This is, it's trickier territory because we have been so conditioned to be quantifying and qualifying our value and our performance based on externalities that because they're measurable, they're observable, they're measurable. Oh, that's what it is. SMART goals. So specific, measurable, achievable, and I forget what RT stands for, but I think, again, intention is so much more powerful, because what intention allows us to do is course correct, right? We either make a goal or we don't make a goal, then we get to make another goal, or maybe we get to adjust the goal. But when we have an intention, the intention opens up all kinds of avenues of possibility that aren't necessarily part of that constrained goal or outcome definition. So Rosalind says, our feelings are experienced whether we are dreaming on drugs or reacting. Who's doing the experiencing? That's the age-old question, Rosalind. Yes, who's doing the experiencing? Who's doing the observing? Who's doing the experiencing? Who's doing the observing? And who's waking up the observer? I don't have answers for these questions, but we definitely have dimensions of consciousness and awareness that we can access at different times with different capabilities, right? So I think that we are very much in the midst of a huge shift in paradigm, and we may have some inklings of what's coming, but I don't know if we can even imagine what's coming, because ideally, potentially, it's going to be a quantum shift. But part of it is this moving into a flow rather than this fractured mechanistic idea of how the world is. This oneness and separation thing goes really, really deep. It goes into everything we do and think. When we look at an issue, like look at in medicine, and I know I've said this before, but in medicine, I've got a cold, I've got a cough. So, maybe a cold isn't the best example, but So there's a certain medication that I can take for those symptoms, right? And there are schools of thought that say, if I have a cold, my body is producing mucus to be able to purge all the stuff from my system, or a fever is to be able to clear the system. And so if I do something, if I treat the fever, then I'm not getting at the root cause, which is the root intention of my body, which is to clear itself of certain toxins. So there might be, rather than trying to get rid of the fever or get rid of the cough or the runny nose, maybe what I want to do is facilitate the cleansing. And because that's really what the intention of the system is. So when we move from this idea that we can cut things up into little pieces and treat the little pieces, or understand the world by understanding all these little pieces, versus looking at the whole system, it's the difference between mechanistic kinds of perception and analysis versus systems thinking. And what we're becoming more and more aware of, and it's making itself more and more present in scientific literature and technology and a whole bunch of different areas, is this movement from reductionist thinking, trying to pull things apart, to systems thinking, which is kind of the same paradigm that I'm talking about today, the movement from goals or objectives to intentions, because intention is a more holistic, or it makes room for a more holistic perspective, a more holistic view or possibility of what may occur. So again, to go back to this phone conversation idea, if my goal is in that conversation is to come away with a sale, or an enrollment, or a definitive black and white kind of outcome, it doesn't leave open the possibility for something that I hadn't even thought of yet. That if my intention instead is to make an authentic connection and to get to know who this person is, or get to know what they're up to, or explore possibilities for collaboration, that's a whole different thing than saying, I want to get this person on board with my idea. It's a very different thing. And so Rosalind says, we can be guided by asking, what is the more loving choice? I love that. And I think that that's a great guidance for everything. What's the more loving choice? And if we could use that as our Northern Star all the time, that would be a pretty amazing thing. But it also brings up additional questions, like loving to whom? Like what's interesting about that is that I think of healer people who often prioritize other people's wants and needs out of making what they believe is a loving choice. And that choice may be really disrespectful of one's own needs. And so is that a loving choice? So that's a whole other conversation, is how do we discern what a loving choice is, right? Ultimately, when we make a choice that is respectful and loving to ourselves, then it translates, I believe, to others. Like if we make a choice for another that is going to damage ourselves, that's not particularly a loving choice, but we don't always make that distinction. Anyway, you always come up with really provocative statements, Rosalind. I appreciate that so much. It's awesome. I had a thought and it just flitted away just that quickly. But anyway, let's be looking at how to connect ourselves more directly with the flow. So this notion of intention is a way of allowing. It's allowing the unfoldment of things without trying to have to control it. This was a really radical revelation, I'll say, for a client. I remember they were planning a party, a family party, and they started out with, everything needed to look a certain way, kind of like the goal. And when they were able to move to a space of intention, the little things didn't matter. What mattered was creating the container, the environment, the possibility for deep connection and joy and communication, and it transformed the whole experience for them. It relieved them of all the stress so that they could actually be present in that experience. So it was a radical shift in being that came about from trying to have everything perfect to having the intention that it was going to be a delightful and enriching experience for everybody who was there. And it was night and day. We talk about black and white. It was night and day. So Rosalind says, when we have compassion for ourselves, how to discern between making excuses versus holding space for the intent. Yeah, that's a really good question. And that comes back to this notion of a balanced rather than a reactive self, right? And being really truly present, kind of stepping into what you were saying earlier, the intention of coming from a loving space. And I don't know that it is a distinction between making excuses on one hand and holding space for the intent on the other. I think, first of all, we can be looking at everything as feedback. So I definitely have kind of a running commentary or a running observation about myself and like, what's going on here? What's this about? Isn't that interesting that that's what I was doing in that situation? What was going on with that? To be in our experience and also observing our experience, and when we become so maybe ultimately we are just our experience and there's no reactivity and we're moving in the flow in a constant responsive way, and there is no commentary perhaps at that point because we are completely 100% present. Maybe that's the ultimate. It's kind of interesting because on one level there's the immersion in our reactivity, right? And we're so immersed in whatever's going on and being so reactive, or that we have no perspective. Then there's the observer self that is able to see that and maybe say, oh, wow, isn't that interesting? What's going on there? And to, disentangle that. And then maybe ultimately it gets back to the self that is ultimately fully present, but in a very integrated, selfless way. So maybe moving from full identification with the self to more observer self to no self. I don't know. I'm just playing with these ideas, trying to make sense of it. I'm not sure why necessarily. Like, I don't know that it leads anywhere particular, but I think we sense whether we're making excuses. If we're justifying something, the idea that everything is feedback, I think that is a really important shift for us to make, because it can allow us to, first of all, it can allow us to be in a greater space of allowing, right? If everything is feedback, then we don't have to be judging, and we can say, okay, that's not really desirable. What am I, that's feedback. What do I do with it? But the idea that everything is feedback kind of allows us to stand to remove ourselves a bit from judgment of self and judgment of others. It's like, oh, that person did this and I'm really pissed off about it. Okay, so what's going on in me? What got triggered in me that I'm really pissed off? And what's going on around that, and what's happening with that other person in our interaction, like what's up with that? It gets to be a little tangled, but the thing that I do have a stronger and stronger conviction about is the necessity for us to move from this place of reductionist thinking and separation to be looking at things from a more holistic view, and that includes ourselves. So as we move from the specificity of goals and objectives and specific outcomes to intention, then there's more capacity, at least in my definition of these things for myself, there's more capacity to be in the flow and to experience even greater outcomes than we would have imagined. And again, it's all feedback. So anyway, fun. Thank you so much for engaging. It's always such a rich pleasure to spend these morning minutes with you. And I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page, and at 9 a.m. Eastern. So I encourage you to check out all the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network, Enlightened World Living, EWN One with the Earth, all those Facebook pages. And until next time, so much gratitude and appreciation to you. You light up my day. Thanks so much.